everyone. The Wednesday, July 24th Operations Safety and Security Committee of RTD will now come to order. We are convened as of 5:32 p.m. I respectfully ask all those in attendance to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be remotely held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practical on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing communications access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like access to this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtddenver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to the live transcript of the meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting will also be available via RTD's YouTube page. So this time I'd like to call the roll of the committee members. Vice Chair Julian Bouquet.
Present.
Member Ian Harwick.
Present.
Member Jamie Lewis. Jamie will be absent tonight. Director Paul Rosenthal.
Present.
Director Joanne Rusha.
Present.
Director Marjorie Sloan, who may also be not with us this evening. We shall see as the evening goes on. And I'm Troy Whitmore, Chair, so there are 5 of the 7 committee members here. We do have a quorum. I also like to recognize that we have Director Peggy Catlin with us as well. Okay, at this point in time, I will open up public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press #9 on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you'd like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtddenver.com. All right, Mr. Kroll, do we have any hands raised for public comments?
Committee Chair Whitmore, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. At this time, I see no hands raised.
All right, thank you very much. All right, that's unusual to not have the public comment in person, but we did have one letter, I believe, from Greater Denver Transit. You all received it in your email from Mr. Bamber and his associates. Were there others that I did not recall to speak to?
Committee Chair Whitmore, again, Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. No, you did not receive any additional letters that the Board Office is aware of at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kroll. All right, information from external entities. There are no external entity reports this evening. However, when we move to item D, we have 2 recommended actions on the agenda. The first action is for the September 2024 Title VI Service Equity Analysis for the Board of Directors to adopt the Title VI Service Equity Analysis Report for September 24 service changes to comply with federal laws, regulations, and guidelines related to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Bouquet.
Second, Rosenthal.
Thank you. I have a proper motion and a second from Directors Bouquet and Rosenthal. I would now like to ask a whole cadre of folks for their presentation, including Martin Romero, Transit Equity Manager, Civil Rights Division, Carl Green Jr., Director of Civil Rights Division, and Jesse Carter, Senior Manager, Service Development, to present this item. I see Carl Green on screen. Are you starting the presentation, Mr. Green? Or is Martin?
Good evening, Board Chair Whitmore, fellow Board of Directors, and my esteemed RTD colleagues. I'll be pulling up the slide deck, but the man of the hour, I'll be yielding the floor to Martin Romero.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Mr. Romero, as soon as the slide deck is up.
There we go. All yours, Martin.
All right. Good evening, fellow colleagues, Board Chair Whitmore, and members of the board. I hope everyone is having a great evening. My name is Martin Romero. I serve as a Transit Equity Manager. Tonight, I'll be covering the September 2024 proposed service changes, Title VI Service Equity Analysis. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of the presentation. I'll be summarizing the proposed service changes, talk about the FTA requirements. I'll cover the equity analysis decision tree, and then we'll get into Title VI policies and methodology. I'll go over the results, touch on public outreach, and then conclude with the recommendations. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have a snapshot of the proposed service changes for September 2024 that were outlined by Senior Manager of Service Development, Jesse Carter. To summarize at a high level, there are a total of 38 proposed service changes. This includes 35 modified changes, 1 reinstatement of service, 1 reduced service, and 1 temporary suspension. And Jesse will speak to these proposed changes in more depth following this presentation. Next slide, please. So according to the FTA, RTD is required to conduct a service equity analysis for all major service changes. And I'll explain what constitutes a major service change during the Title VI policy section of this presentation. Next slide. Okay, so Title VI of the Civil Rights Act sets the legal precedent for non-discrimination requirements for agencies receiving federal financial assistance. The FTA circular provides guidance and framework to ensure that agencies are following Title VI requirements, and the board adopted Title VI program establishes the policies and methods in which we carry out this type of work. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide provides an overview of the 3 steps in the decision-making process for conducting an equity analysis. So step 1 is to evaluate the type of change. And so in this step, we determine if the change is a major service change. And if the answer to that is yes, we proceed on to step 2, which is to evaluate potential impacts. In step 2, we assess if there are disparate impacts on minority populations or disproportionate burden on low-income populations at the 150% federal poverty level. If adverse impacts are identified, then we proceed on to step 3, where we evaluate alternatives and identify ways to minimize, mitigate, or avoid the potential impacts on equity populations. And just of note, there will be times when I will refer to minority and low-income populations as equity populations. Next slide, please. Okay, Title VI policies, major service change, disparate impact, and disproportionate burden. Another note, I'll also be referring to these terms, disparate impact as DI and disproportionate burden as DB. Next slide, please. Okay, so what constitutes a major service change? So RTD defines a major service change as a 25% addition or reduction in the service hours of any route or line that would remain in effect for 12 months or more. And so based on this definition, the analysis results in 1 out of 38 service changes exceeding the major service change threshold. And the major service change identified and in discussion is an increase to service. Next slide, please. Okay, DI and DB, which we also refer to as Title VI policies, state that a major service change should not adversely affect equity populations 10% more than non-equity populations. And specifically, the policies state that for a service increase, equity populations receive no less than 10% of non-equity populations. And for service reductions, equity populations receive no more than 10% of non-equity populations. So given that information, here's an example of how we assess potential disparities for proposed changes. So in this example here, we can see that the percent of non-minority populations being impacted by a proposed change is 25%. And so we calculate the threshold, we would multiply 25 times 10%, which equates to 2.5. And if we add 2.5 to 25, that equates to 27.5. And so if the percent of minority populations impacted exceeds 27.5, then we have a possible disparity for major service reduction, right? Inversely, we subtract 2.5 from 25, that equates to 22.5. And so if the percent of minority populations impacted falls below 22.5, then we have a possible disparity for a major service increase. And the same type of calculation applies when testing for DB. Next slide, please. Okay, so each Title VI policy is applied at the route level. And so this analysis looks at the demographics within a quarter mile of individual lines using US Census data. And that helps us to understand the impacts that changes will have within that population. One key point that I do want to mention is that the service district average for minority is 37.5% and 14.2% for low income. The system level analysis combines all the block group populations, not just the quarter mile populations under the route stops. So this helps us to understand the net impact on any service running through the block groups. So ultimately, this provides us with a holistic approach and ensures equitable provisions of our services. Next slide, please. Okay, so before discussing the route level results, a quick reminder that the Title VI policies establish a threshold in order for us to perform the comparison, right? So the route that met the threshold for a major service change is Route 40. And the results indicate that minority populations received less. The results indicate that the minority populations receive less of an increase in service at 0.91% compared to non-minority populations at 1.06%, a difference of 0.15. And this meets the threshold of 0.95, therefore there is a potential DI. For low-income populations stand to benefit slightly less at 0.99 than non-low-income populations at 1.01%. That's a difference of 0.02. This doesn't meet the threshold for the threshold of 0.91, therefore there is no DB found. So in summary, Route 40 findings contain a potential DI and no DB. Next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to route level analysis for assessing potential DI, we also put focus on key public activity centers to better understand where customers are going. Specifically, we look for changes in access to retail and convenience stores, academic institutions, social services, senior housing and employment centers, and this helps us to assess increased, reduced, or new access to these critical locations. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we look at Route 40, we can see that this proposed change improves access to 44,340 jobs, 119 grocers, 66 social services, 9 senior housing centers, and 27 academic institutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's get into the system level results for Route 40. Minority populations stand to benefit less compared to non-minority populations, and that's 1.37% versus 1.7%, difference of 0.37. This does meet the DI threshold of 1.56. Low-income populations stand to benefit slightly less compared to non-low-income populations, 1.57 versus 1.62, a difference of 0.5%, which does not meet the DB threshold of 1.46. And so to sum up the system-wide level findings, similar to the route level findings, contain a potential DI and no DB. And I do want to point out that this change is an enhancement and will provide access to equity populations from the northern part of the route to jobs in the southern part of the route. Next slide, please. Okay, so equally important as the route and system-wide analyses is the outreach and public engagement. I want to highlight that there were 6 public meetings from June 18th through June 26th, 2 virtual meetings and 4 in-person meetings. And this was done to inform and collect public comment. Next slide, please. In addition to public meetings, our community engagement and communications department produced a webinar recording that was made accessible online for customers and a dedicated web page, as well as downloadable toolkits, which were provided and shared with our community partners. Efforts were also made to increase the use of social media platforms. Public comment was made available through our customer care line to address, inclusion efforts for customers who lack internet service. In-system promotional assets were also placed on our buses and rail lines, and paid media was also leveraged. And the impact team was also deployed directly to stops and stations to inform and collect feedback on the proposed changes. Next slide, please. So taking public engagement and outreach one step further, the Transit Equity Office did direct outreach to 67 key public activity centers within a quarter mile of Route 40. We leveraged our CBO partners to collect feedback along the corridor and at local community events. We connected with another partner, Denver Public Library, and forwarded the service change toolkits to assist in disseminating this information to four branches along Route 40. We also partnered with Village Exchange at one of their events where the information was shared with over 100 of their members in an effort to inform and garner more feedback. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you recall from the decision tree, step 3, if there is a DI finding, the agency must evaluate alternatives. And considering that there are no practical alternatives to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the finding, the agency can still proceed with the changes if there is substantial legitimate justification. And as I mentioned earlier, the changes to Route 40 are an enhancement that will benefit equity populations by improving access to jobs in the southern end of the corridor. Additionally, it includes adding a compliant restroom at each terminal. Next slide, please. Okay, so to summarize the presentation, I covered the Title VI service equity analysis, methodology, the findings, and overall conclusions. This meets the FTA requirement for board awareness and consideration of the equity analysis. And at this time, staff recommends approval of the September 2024's Title VI service equity analysis. That concludes the presentation at this time, and I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Romero. I take it no other additional presentation from Mr. Green or any of the other staff members then? All right, we'll go to questions. I see in queue Director Rosenthal. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Martin and Carl, for that extensive review process and presentation. And I know from your presentation that you had a lot of outreach to the community, which I appreciate the increase and the depth that you're really trying to increase that. And so my question is, have you, what conversations have you had with Denver Public Schools? And I particularly note that the 40 goes by Thomas Jefferson High School, and they've been trying to increase that frequency. So I appreciate that.
Proceed, gentlemen, whoever would like to answer Director Rosenthal.
Director Whitmore, if I may.
Go ahead.
Great question, Director Rosenthal. That is, as we think about our community engagement and public outreach efforts, we are taking a concerted effort to ensure that we are reaching out to community-based organizations. As you can see, this has been a valiant effort, starting with our overall approach to outreach this time around with respect to the September 2024 service changes. So not specifically with Jefferson Public Library or schools specifically. I know as part of the Zero Fare for Youth program, a lot of outreach was conducted at that level, but not specifically for this particular service change for the Route 40.
All right, thank you. And then my second question, it mentions bathroom access, quote, at each terminal. What does that mean? Maybe describe that a little bit more.
Carl, if you don't mind, I'll answer this question.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Okay, thank you. Director Rosenthal, as part of the collective bargaining agreement with the union, we have a responsibility of providing a restroom at any given terminal that we end our services at. It's not something that's easily done, given the way our routes are laid out and the size of our district. But wherever we can, we're doing our best to actually come in compliance with those rules. So it's basically making sure that our operators have a location for respite. Does that answer your question?
All right, evidently so. Any other questions from members of the committee or any other board members? I'm not seeing any others. All right, I believe it's time to vote. Are there any no votes on this properly made motion and second? Not seeing any no votes, so the motion passes 5-0 with 2 members of the committee absent. Thank you, gentlemen, for your very in-depth presentation. All right, let's move to second action item, September 2024 service change. For the Board of Directors to approve the September 2024 service change as revised and summarized in Attachment A, and to authorize the General Manager and CEO or her designee to execute contract amendments as necessary for private operators impacted by the service changes. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Rosenthal.
Second.
And the second from Harwick, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, we have a motion and a second from Rosenthal and Harwick. All right, I would like to ask Fred Worthen, Assistant General Manager, Bus Operations, and Jesse Carter, Senior Manager, Service Development, to present this item. Looks like we might even have some input from Stuart Summers as well from our Communications Department. Gentlemen, the floor is yours, so whoever wants to start, proceed, please.
Thank you, Chair Whitmore. Good evening, honorable board members. I am Fred Worthen, AGM of Bus Operations. I'm joined by Jesse Carter, Senior Manager of Service Development, and Stuart Summers, Chief Communications and Engagement Officer. We're here tonight to recommend approval of the revised September 2024 service change as summarized in your board packet, and to seek authorization for the General Manager and CEO or her designee to execute contract amendments as necessary for private operators impacted by the service change. Tonight, we'll provide an overview of the recommended service changes, update you on public outreach and engagement activities, and apprise you of recommended revisions to the September service change. As a bit of refresher, RTD reviews, proposes, and implements changes to service schedules 3 times a year in accordance with our collective bargaining agreement with ATU Local 1001. These changes typically occur in January, May, and in the late August, early September timeframes. Service changes strive to increase service reliability, improve on-time performance, provide represented employees an opportunity to select work shifts, account for changes in ridership, meet the goals of the system optimization plan, and to support scheduled maintenance projects. The September service change began formally with a number of outreach and engagement activities from mid-May through the end of June to solicit feedback to consider as part of the proposed September service change packet. Public comment and feedback opportunities were concluded on June 28, 2024. Today, staff is presenting a recommended set of proposed service changes to this committee. If approved tonight, the recommended September service change proposal will be submitted to the Board of Directors on July 30th for final approval. If approved by the full board, September service changes will take effect September 29th. Service change proposals are typically comprised of route adjustments, seasonal adjustments, increases in service reductions, and schedule timing. Route adjustments are made to optimize the efficiency of service as well as to improve accessibility to our customers, respond to changing travel patterns, or facilitate maintenance projects. Seasonal adjustments are temporary in nature and made to account for variations in demand or operational conditions. Service increases are increases to the frequencies, trip, span of service, or operating hours. These increases typically spawn from increased demand by customers for service or to provide new service to major activity centers or other attractions. Service reductions are decreases in the frequencies of trips, spans of service, or operating hours, typically stemming from decreased demand for services by customers or to increase the efficiency of fledgling routes. Schedule timing adjustments are typically alterations to the running time of bus and rail service to better align with customer demands, trip connections, or to improve on-time performance. With that, I'll turn it over to Stuart Summers, who will discuss our public outreach efforts with regard to the September service change.
Thank you, Fred. Good evening, board. As introduced, I'm Stuart Summers. I'm the Chief Communications and Engagement Officer. I want to take a few minutes and talk about our enhanced outreach and engagement that was undertaken between mid-May and late June. As this board is well aware, we overhauled our engagement efforts in an effort to try and increase our outreach and our ability to communicate with customers and the public about our service changes. This included increased marketing materials, enhanced media relations. We leveraged a number of our stakeholders, community organizations, community events that were going on, deploying staff to those events. We also dispatched staff to potentially impacted stops and stations. We've talked a lot this evening about our impact team. We dispatched impact team members out across the community to directly engage with customers at those stops and stations where there may be an impact. And then we also streamlined the feedback process in an effort to garner input by route line and potential impact by a customer. Next slide. With this service change, we also adopted 5 different ways for individuals to provide feedback. First, we deployed an online survey that was available, and I'll get into that in just a little bit, really trying to hone in on what was some of that feedback by route or line. We also invited individuals to call customer care, provide their feedback over the phone, and one of our customer care agents could take that feedback and provide it to service development. As this board's well aware, we also collect public comment at any of our meetings, whether it be a board of directors meeting or also any of our service changes meetings. RTD staff at community events also, while connecting with customers in the community, collected feedback. And then also, as we've done in the past, individuals were invited to send emails and have that feedback recorded by service development as well. Next slide. As part of our owned media efforts, these are the opportunities that RTD directly maintains, manages, and controls. We first dispatched our marketing materials in English and Spanish. The service changes webpage that was referenced earlier this evening during this feedback window had approximately 10,600 views of that webpage. On vehicle transfluxes, these are the advertisements, if you will, that we put on our revenue vehicles. We had more than 2,000 of those that were dispatched across the district on our vehicles to communicate about the service changes. More than 20,000 rack cards, simply the brochures that we put out on vehicles and at our different locations and sales outlets to communicate about the potential changes and what was being proposed. And then also the impact team had the rack cards that they handed out at stops and stations. And then, as referenced earlier by Mr. Romero, we created a partner toolkit that was sent to more than 800 community-based organizations, neighborhood associations, partners, nonprofits, really trying to engage the community to help us share this message more broadly and widely across the metro area. Next slide. RTD also hosted and provided presentations at 13 different public meetings that we were invited to. Not only the ones that we hosted, but also different neighborhood associations invited us to participate and provide information. Approximately 150 written comments and feedback submissions were received at these meetings. This includes also those email submissions and then calls to customer care. And then the impact team that I referenced earlier was dispatched to 38 stops and stations during that approximately 6-week feedback window, where they engaged with about 1,500 customers to communicate about the service changes and provide information, answer questions, and help people understand the 3 times a year that we do these service changes. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we created an online survey for the first time, really trying to hone in on some of this feedback and provide one location for customers to easily provide feedback about any of the proposed changes. 227 online surveys were completed during the feedback window that concluded the end of June. This reflects 19 different routes and lines that feedback was provided about. Approximately 67% of the feedback related to a bus route and 32% related to a rail line. 27% of the responses related to Route 0 or 0B, which was our highest. And then Route 40 was the second highest to garner about 43 respondents on that feedback. One thing that we also, that was important to us is we wanted to know how people were learning about the service changes. Were our efforts successful, and where were people finding out that information? 27% of people indicated social media, 22% by visiting RTD's website, and then from there it goes down to email, news reports, and any other method that may be word of mouth or an impact team member. All unedited comments and information that we received has been included in the board materials so that all directors can be able to comb through that information and see what feedback was provided by customers during this feedback window between mid-May and late June. Next slide. And with that, I will turn it over to Jesse Carter.
Thank you,
Please
Stuart.
proceed when you're ready, Jesse.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Can I have the next slide? I'm sorry, can you back up to, rather? There we go. So with that, I'm Jesse Carter. Good evening, Board of Directors. I just want to go over one of the major modifications to the initial service change. Next slide. With each service change, service development continues analyzing information coming from RTD's transit operations, and modifications are often made to initial recommendations to better suit changes in operating conditions or customer needs. With the September 2024 service change, the modifications to the initial service change recommendation seeks to improve schedule adherence on light rail while accommodating ongoing rail maintenance projects within available staffing levels. The overall effect of the recommended modifications either maintain or increase service levels. Next slide, please. Speaking more specifically to the recommended modifications, it is recommended that the E and H lines be increased to 30-minute frequency instead of the 15-minute frequency previously recommended. And now I should state that we are currently operating on the E and H lines at 60-minute service frequency. I should also note that this remains an increase, though smaller than was initially proposed. With the needed time added to the schedule for ongoing maintenance on the southeast and southwest lines, this modification aligns with RTD's current staffing levels. Next page. So viewing the modification to the plan from a light rail network perspective, the targeted number of trains provided per hour in the modified plan are as follows. And I don't have control of the cursor, so I'm gonna go clockwise. So we're gonna start with 30th and Downing. So with return the L line, we'll have 4 trains operating per hour going into the downtown area. Going out towards the east area, we are maintaining the R line at 2 trains per hour. However, where the R and the H line are common to each other from Florida to south, basically to the 225 junction, we're going to be operating every 4 trains per hour. Continuing, going further south, we're operating the E line at 2 trains per hour. And then where it is common with the R line, we're operating trains 4 trips per hour. And then continuing across clockwise, going to the southwest quarter, the southwest D line will be maintained at 4 trips per hour. And then on the southeast quarter, where the E and H lines are common to one another, we'll be operating 4 trips per hour. In the central corridor going up, we have 8 trains per hour operating on the central corridor, where the D line, the E and H line are common. And then on the west corridor, we have 4 trips per hour being offered. And then the CPV, or Central Platte Valley, we're offering 6 trips per hour to Denver Union Station. So with that, moving forward, we want to describe this as the number of trains per hour comparison of May to September to give you an idea that, again, this is an increase in service and not a decrease, or things are remaining the same. So comparing current levels of service, looking at the central quarter, we are increasing trains currently from 6 trains to 8 trains per hour. The R line is maintained at 2. Returning service to the downtown loop on the central corridor, we are going to 10 trains per hour from 0. And then with the increase on the L line, or the return of the L line, we're going to 4 trains per hour. So not to go through every single line of this, but to instead point out some other changes that are notable. We have the Ball Arena, Elitch Gardens towards the bottom of the page in the first column. We are reducing the level of service there, and that's because of the fact that we're going back downtown with the D and the H lines. But you'll also see that Colfax and Auraria at the bottom of the page, again in the first column, we are increasing from 0 trips back up to 6. So overall, I would want to state that, again, the modification to the plan is not a reduction in service overall. It is an increase. It just isn't at the level that the initial plan was. However, we think this fits better with our efforts to try to increase reliability on the light rail network and to adapt to the changes that we're seeing with slow orders and other maintenance activities. Next slide. And with that, that ends our presentation.
Thank you, gentlemen. I do appreciate that, and especially the enhanced communication component as well. And I learned a new word tonight, transfluxes. We had 2,215 of them, Stuart. Pretty impressive. So new word for the simple mind here. Other comments or questions from the committee or any other board members on this matter? Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Jesse, Stuart, and Fred. By the way, is it okay if I just say first names? Is that okay, or do we prefer last? All right. So first of all, thank you very much for all that hard work on those service changes. So to be exact, what is the exact date in September that this is going to be going into effect? And perhaps we might include that in any, PowerPoint or discussion or publicity, so folks know it's not just in September, that there's an exact date. Is it the 1st? Is it the 5th, or what have you?
Chair, if I might.
Please proceed.
Director Rosenthal, I apologize. I should have mentioned the fact that it's September 29th, which is different from the initial time frame, which was September 15th. We are looking at September 29th for this service change.
Thank you. And then, so do we have the people power to increase the services from 60-minute frequency to 30-minute frequency on the trains?
I do see that GM CEO Johnson has her hand raised. Perhaps you'd like to address that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to yield the floor to Mr. Jensen. He's online as he can talk about the people power. But one thing I wanted to qualify in reference to Director Rosenthal's previous question about the specific date, we didn't elaborate as to why the date was changed. The reason why the date was changed from September 15th to September 29th is because we were working with our union partners. We wanted to ensure that we could complete critical projects to minimize impacts to our customers. So we would have a schedule to which we could adhere to increase schedule adherence. And so that is why the date was changed, as opposed to going forward with the 15th and doing modifications and not managing the customer expectations by not having trains arrive when the schedule said they would arrive. So I just wanted to provide that context, and now I will yield the floor to Mr. Jensen. Thank you.
Mr. Jensen, proceed.
Yes, good evening. I am Dave Jensen, AGM of Rail Operations, and the short answer is yes, we have the personnel to be able to provide this service. But and in fact, I would point out that our overall headcount for light rail train operators has increased. But there's always the caveat. It's very close and it's very tight. We can make service today, but the absentee rate are variables that come into play. We don't have enough operators for a large extra board if there are large numbers of employees that call in sick, for instance, or if there are unforeseen circumstances on the system, then it's possible that we would lose a trip or so. So we do have the headcount, I think, is the short answer that you're looking for right now today as it stands.
And I believe we're going into Charlene's presentation where there are, I believe it's 11 more train operators are going, they're graduating, so that we will be adding to that number. But I do get what you're talking about, that it's still a tight number who can operate the trains. Given that, and we've gotten some feedback from the community that we should be at 15-minute frequency and intervals. Is that something that even if we wanted to, with this service change, we would not be able to do given our people power? And I do understand that, there are different lines, and the L is going to be 15-minute, but some of the others will be 30, for example. If we wanted to, would we be able to, given our people power?
Mr. Jensen.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that. I would point out what you did. First of all, if you look at the map that was showed on the PowerPoint, that the section of track between Southmore and North is getting 15-minute service, which is more than the majority of what the E-line serves. To answer your question, though, we could provide 15-minute service, but that would stretch us very thin. It would be the same as it was early last year where it was extremely tight. So we could provide service, but would have zero flexibility for service restoration and very, very little flexibility for anybody calling in sick at all. So it would be very tight, and we would not be performing as well as we would be right now with the schedule that we're proposing.
Right. And then I know I'm asking a lot of questions and I apologize for that, but perhaps just a final one. And I know this is something and perhaps our general manager might relay why, and this is something, again, we've also heard from the community, is why do we have 3 service changes a year? And perhaps you might also compare with other transit agencies, which may have maybe more or fewer service changes a year, and then perhaps relay why, why does that work for RTD? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I will start.
Please.
So recognizing that we do have 3 service changes per year, there's a myriad of reasons as to why there is a service change. First and foremost, we want to ensure that we're giving our employees an opportunity to bid on work shifts. We do this in a manner in which it is equitable. We leverage seniority and other aspects that are negotiated and that are contained in a collective bargaining agreement. The reason, as it relates to the timing that's traditional in transit service delivery, is that we have seasonal ridership. It is customary to have service changes at the beginning of the year, typically in the December-January timeframe, due to the fact that it's after the holiday season and generally people are going back to school and back to work. Recognizing the end of the school year is generally in the May-June timeframe, service changes usually occur at that time to accommodate the transition in ridership, as well as not providing as much service to various activity centers. Then once again, service changes typically take place in the fall for the reasons I outlined, recognizing that school may be in session and people are back from vacations. In my experience, which is just my experience, at the 7 transit agencies at which I've worked, there typically has been 3 service changes. In some instances, you can have an agency that may have a 4th, maybe to do some cleanup, but it's customary to have 3 service changes a year. And what's critically important about that is that you would not want somebody operating the same route, the same line on a continuous basis without having the opportunity at looking at different options for a work shift. And so that is why we do that, because it's important for the safe delivery of transit. It provides work schedules that are a mandatory subject of bargaining. So that would be my question. Mr. Worthen, I did see your hand. I don't know if there's anything else. You're good?
No, ma'am, you hit everything that I was going to say.
It's not my first rodeo. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Good.
And
Director Harwick with his lasso
Thank
going
you.
there. All right, thank you all. Director Ruscia, you're next in line. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a question about or I guess maybe it's a comment regarding this change in date for our September service changes to the 29th. I have a concern that school starts like for DPS, for example, it starts the 19th. That's the same for Jefferson County, and then Westminster is August 13th. And so unless I misunderstood staff, we're not having schedule changes, like they're not going to be implemented at different times for trains and buses. It's all going in at once. And school will have been in session for 4 to 6 weeks by the time some of these students have school tripper services. I just wanted to make sure that's where we are.
I see Fred Worthen's hands raised. Perhaps he would like to address the
Yes, I would. And
very
thank you.
pertinent question.
Thank you for asking that question, Director Ruscia. Yes, you are correct. School will be in session. We do have the ability, and typically what we would do is build special trips within our system to be able to accommodate the extra services that are needed to accommodate individuals who are traveling to school and other areas. And typically, our service change dates can float as much as 2 weeks before or after a given date that's normally set anyway. So typically, if we push a service change backwards, we'll do what we call manual orders. We will build those trips within our system, and we will assign extra board operators to do that, do those services. And thank you for bringing that up. We failed to mention that we intended to handle those services that.
If I may just follow up for clarification, Mr. Chair.
I forgot to take myself off mute, but I'll go back to mute. You still have the floor.
Thank you, sir. And I presume it's okay to just direct dialogue. So just so I understand, we do have the capability to go ahead and reinstate school tripper services before the 29th. What wasn't clear is that a decision that staff has made for sure? Have we evaluated that fully? And then would that be part of our recommended action, just for clarity, at the board meeting next week?
So,
Good
Mr.
question.
Chair, if I may, and then I will yield the floor to my colleagues that are assembled here that are the SMEs in this area. So going back to the previous question that Director Rosenthal had asked relative to our service changes, I do want to qualify that we provide tripper service. School trippers, we do not provide dedicated school bus service, as that would be a violation of the Federal Transit Administration because we provide public transit services. So as it relates to trippers, when we look to see where there could be an influx, this is within staff's ability, being transit service professionals, to deploy services. It's no different if we had GAP trains recognizing that we needed to clear a platform and things of the like, and that's why we have the extra board. So I just wanted to qualify for everybody that words matter, because RTD does not provide school trippers, we provide tripper service. With that, I will yield the floor to Mr. Worthen to further address the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam CEO. To answer your question, Director Ruscia, no, there is not any to make any special amendments to this. We have done this in the past many times whenever we have adjusted the service schedule date to accommodate the extra services that Ms. Johnson has alluded to. And yes, we do intend to implement those services as we normally would in conjunction with the peak service needs that we have seen in the past.
Director Ruscia, further questions?
No further questions, sir. I just wanted at this juncture for I'm going to be a no vote on this one. It came as a surprise, and as a mom of a kid who until graduated high school depended on these school tripper services, and just recognizing where some of these schools are, I need to sit on that one, although I absolutely understand and respect that this might be our practice. So I just wanted to disclose why I'm going to be a no vote on the changes, and it is specifically related to this issue. And I felt it was appropriate to disclose why. I also appreciate staff for their thoughtful and detailed response. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I see no further hands raised regarding questions for this matter. So, there's Director Rosenthal. Go ahead, sir.
And I'm so sorry, and perhaps this is a better question for Michael Davies, but perhaps General Manager or somebody might relay. How are we going to communicate this to community leadership and for folks, for example, legislators, the PUC, the governor? Let them know a little bit more about some of the efforts that RTD is doing to provide increased and improved service.
So thank you very much, Director Rosenthal. Mr. Chair, I apologize if I may proceed. Thank you very kindly. So the very detailed presentation that Mr. Summers gave relative to our communications efforts, we include everyone from the vantage point. When I say everyone, various stakeholder groups. Additionally, we provide updates through our lobbyists where we are giving vital information to members of the legislature about what we're doing. As it relates to the Public Utilities Commission, this is not of a safety aspect, but we do keep them apprised as we move forward with various things that impact transit service delivery. And so with that, I have Mr. Summers, whose hand is raised, and he can talk more specifically about how we have targeted communication tactics for varying audiences. Mr. Summers?
Yeah, Chair Whitmore, if I may. Just to add a little finer point to what Ms. Johnson was saying, Director Rosenthal, I mentioned that we had sent an email early in this feedback process to more than 800 community-based organizations. I failed to also mention that we included elected officials in that e-blast to ensure that they had that information and asked them to share it with their communities, post it to their social media. And then also Mr. Michael Davies sent emails and follow-up communication to elected officials to ensure that they were well aware of the proposed service changes, as well as the Downtown Rail reconstruction project and coping panels projects and updates that have been happening over the last approximately 2 months. So we've been trying to be very highly communicative to these different stakeholders, especially those in the municipalities in which the district resides.
All right, thank you both for that input. Any other questions? All right, I will call for the vote. We will do a roll call vote on this matter. Vice Chair Bouquet, how do you vote?
I'm a yes.
Thank you. Director Harwick.
Yes.
Director Lewis is absent. Director Rosenthal.
Yes.
Director Rusha.
Unfortunately, no.
All right. Director Sloan is absent, and I am a yes vote. Motion passes 4-1 with 2 absent, and Director Rusha in the negative on this matter. All right, that's all for action items. We do have several items on presentation side of things, discussion items. Item E. The first one is language access plan update, and we will ask Carl Green Jr., Director of Civil Rights Division, to rejoin us, along with Danny McLean, Transit Equity Specialist, to present this item. Carl, go ahead. Carl, you are muted. Looks like you're unmuted now. No.
All right. Good evening again,
There we go.
Board Chair Whitmore and fellow Board of Directors. Apologies. Again, my name is Carl Green Jr., Director of the Civil Rights Division. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing one of my teammates and primary presenter for this discussion item, Danny McLean, Transit Equity Specialist. I'd just like to highlight that Danny first started with RTD back in March of 2022, and she has not skipped a beat with shepherding the development and implementation of RTD's Enhanced Language Access Plan, along with the cross matrix of staff throughout the agency. I can recall speaking with our General Manager and CEO, Johnson, when I first started back in 2021 regarding our language access efforts, and I can happily report that we as an agency are moving in the right direction from a systematic or systems level perspective with improving our language access for our linguistically diverse customers. Before I yield the floor to Ms. McLean, I'll briefly go over the, I'll briefly go over the outline for tonight's presentation. First, we'll provide you with a brief overview of why RTD prioritizes language access among its equity efforts from a federal and regulatory compliance perspective. And next, we'll go over at a high level the progress to date of what we have done with fulfilling our 2022 language access plan, as well as the 3-year implementation schedule. And then finally, we'll provide some initial thoughts as we look ahead to the upcoming 2025 Title VI program and language access plan updates. At this point in time, I'll now yield the floor to Ms. McLean.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carl. Good evening to the Board of Directors and to my fellow esteemed RTD staff. I am delighted to be here today. So to kick off the remainder of the presentation, I want to start with talking about what language access even is and how RTD structures its language access work within the agency. So language access is rooted, unsurprisingly, within civil rights, specifically Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You just heard about it in the previous presentation by Mr. Romero, and I'm sure you've heard of it before, but Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Now, you may notice, right, that race, color, or national origin don't include language. So where does language fall within Title VI? Well, it wasn't until 1974, specifically the Supreme Court case Lau v. Nichols, where it was determined that the national origin class and protected category of Title VI includes language. It includes English proficiency. Therefore, amongst the other classes protected by Title VI, language is protected, and therefore federally funded agencies like RTD have to ensure meaningful access to individuals who are not English speakers to be compliant with Title VI law. Next slide, please. So the core of language access and language access protections are non-English speakers. And my preferred terminology here is linguistically diverse customers, which you may have heard Carl already use. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But this term non-English speakers is really rooted in the US Census definition of who is a limited English proficient persons, or LEP persons, as you may have heard. So the very explicit definition of LEP persons are those folks who speak English, quote, less than very well. So a customer can be non-English speaking or LEP if English is not their primary language, they cannot read, speak, write, or understand English, or more generally, their language status poses a barrier to them, right, in accessing social services such as public transit or healthcare, for example. One thing that I would note, and this gets back to my preferred terminology of linguistically diverse, the US Census description of LEP, or even the term non-English speaker, it doesn't really touch on individuals where perhaps they prefer, right, or the language of their heart is a different language other than English. And so that group is kind of left out in a lot of the language access efforts, you know, as described by compliance measures like the FTA circular. But we really want to include those individuals in the work that we do in language access. So in addition to that, I do want to make a note, non-English speaking customers and persons can be anybody, right? They can be born on US soil, they can be US citizens, they could be born abroad, or they could be coming in from the airport on the A line as tourists, or perhaps doing business in Denver, or as we've seen more recently with the influx of newcomers, i.e. refugees, immigrants, or asylum seekers, who have very strong language needs and who tend to be more linguistically diverse. So just keep this in mind, because we don't want to have a stereotypical or cliche idea of who may be a non-English speaker and who may not be. And then one last thing that I would say on this slide, and I know there's no visual for this, so I apologize for it, but we know that there's approximately 270,000 people within the service area who qualify as the US Census LEP individual. So 270,000. That's approximately 7%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you do the math, that comes out to about 1 in 14 individuals. So you fill up an RTD bus to capacity, you're going to have a handful of folks who cannot speak or communicate in English in that bus. Okay, so just to highlight the importance of this. Unsurprisingly, Spanish is the top language of our linguistically diverse communities at about 70%, specifically of the LEP population, followed by a pretty steep drop off with Vietnamese and Chinese, including Cantonese and Mandarin, at about 4%. And then we have Russian and Korean at 2%. And those are just the top 5 of the 21 safe harbor languages that we have identified in the service area. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you so much. So the language access process here at RTD effectively follows a 3-year cycle in tandem with our Title VI program update. So this past and current session, I should say, is 2022 to 2025. So this 3-year cycle is really built and specified within the FTA Title VI Circular. And the Title VI Circular #1 specifies that we need to conduct a 4-factor analysis. So the 4-factor analysis is kind of a fancy way of referring to data collection. We need to have data on the language needs of our service area in order to provide meaningful language access to these individuals in order to provide language assistance. So for instance, the 4-factor analysis includes the number of, LEP persons within the service area, or another example would be the number of interactions or the frequency of interactions that frontline staff have with linguistically diverse individuals. So that's the 4-factor analysis. We last conducted that in 2021 to 2022 for our current language access plan. So once the 4-factor analysis is complete, then we create the language access plan. And this was completed in 2022, pretty shortly after I came on board. It was quite the rush. And this really specifies how RTD is going to provide that language assistance to linguistically diverse persons. And we'll talk more about that in a second. And currently, our current phase that we're in is that implementation phase, right? Because the plan doesn't mean much if you're not implementing the plan. So from 2022 all the way to next year in 2025, when the next update will occur, we're implementing all of the tasks that are listed in the plan and monitoring our progress, which is part of the reason we're presenting to you here today. Next slide, please. So here to the left is an itty-bitty image of our language access plan. So as I mentioned, that was finalized and adopted by the board on May 24 of 2022. So it's a 60-page document, and that excludes approximately 100 pages of exhibits. And exhibits include things like US Census maps of the demographics in the service area, as well as our language access frontline staff survey that we distributed and collected in 2021, I believe it was. And this is a great expansion from the language access plan of 2019 to 2022 that was only about 19 pages long. So this is the backbone of our language access work. And I want to say too that the language access plan, yes, it is a requirement of the FTA. We have to provide this as part of our Title VI program, but we really also want to ensure that it moves beyond compliance and really focalizes on it's the right thing for us to do to serve our community and to make lives better through connections by focusing on language assistance and prioritizing language access. So next slide, please. All right, we've talked about the background for language access, where it comes from, how we administer it. So let's actually dive into a little bit of the content of the language access plan from 2022 to 2025 and the progress made thus far. Next, thank you. So the plan is structured around the 4 guidelines that you can see on this slide. And these can be found on board packet page 186. And under the 4 guidelines are the language access related tasks that the agency isn't intended to pursue, until 2025. So the first guideline or chapter, as it were, is regarding the administration of the language access plan. So how we update and monitor the plan. The second guideline is about the actual provision of language assistance, how RTD provides that meaningful access to our linguistically diverse customers. So that includes things like translation of documents and signage, for example, or providing interpretation at events. Now, guideline number 3, which may seem similar to guideline number 2, is providing notice of that language assistance. Essentially, how do we communicate and advertise the availability of language assistance to our customers? And then finally, training programs. So this has been a huge focus of this cycle's language access plan. And this is, how RTD trains our employees to provide language assistance, overcome language barriers, and communicate in a culturally competent way. Next slide, please. So under these 4 guidelines of the language access plan, there are 30 8 separate tasks. And I know that sounds like a lot, and it is, and it has been, but I'm very happy to report that as of June 1st of this year, all of the tasks were at a very bare minimum started. And more specifically, 74%, about 3/4 of the tasks, are considered by our team to be complete or ongoing complete. And then about 1/4, which is 10 of the tasks, are still in progress. And just to provide a little bit of clarity on what we mean here, what's complete versus ongoing complete. So when a task is complete, we consider that it has an end product or an end result that's very specific and tangible. And so if it's complete, then we mark it as complete. Whereas ongoing complete, the task itself, it's not necessarily an end product or a result, but something that occurs on an ongoing basis. For example, we have a task that it says translate vital documents. Translation of vital documents is an ongoing thing. Therefore, we consider it to be ongoing complete. And then obviously tasks that are in progress have work still to be done. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight and recognize some of the activities that we have done in order to accomplish the 38 tasks within the plan. So starting with prioritizing outreach, our team, the Transit Equity Office, we have made a concerted effort to conduct outreach to multilingual, multicultural, and really newcomer focused organizations, because these are the organizations who tend to have the most, language assistance needs in relation to a lot of other social needs as well. So for example, here to the left, you see a little image. I took this image. This was at a travel training that I conducted in collaboration with Dr. Mack and the group Empowering Communities Globally. And we actually taught about 70 women from all over Asia and Africa, and they were just women with some of their children, how to use RTD programs and services. And that was a very, very fun and meaningful event to me, in which we provided, you can see headsets being worn, in which we provided interpretation and translated materials in 3 different languages. But beyond that, we've worked with many other organizations that have similar missions. So I would highlight Hope Communities, Spring Institute, Servicios de la Raza, which is noted here, and others in which we've attended newcomer resource fairs, shelters, and so on and so forth. The second item here I want to really highlight and celebrate is the increased usage that we've seen of telephonic interpretation. So RTD staff had access to Language Link, which is a telephonic interpretation service, prior to my arrival in 2022. But the problem was it wasn't advertised that telephonic interpretation existed to customers, and our staff really didn't know how to use Language Link. There really weren't instructions around for customer care, for example, to use that service. So unsurprisingly, we just had 1 call, and that was in I believe, Mandarin Chinese in calendar year 2022. And then after training customer care how to use that service, after adding some advertisements about the availability of telephonic interpretation across our system, that increased to 115 calls in 2023. And I'm happy to report that in 2024, thus far, as of today specifically, we've had 80 calls using Language Link telephonic interpretation. Next slide, please. Language access activities continued. So I mentioned prior training, right? Training was a big focus of our language access plan. And it also behooves me to note that many of the activities I'm talking about today are first of their kind activities here at RTD. For example, the relationships that I highlighted on the previous slide, those are not relationships that RTD has historically had. And we've now cultivated those relationships with those organizations and individuals. This is very similar in that we did not have training on how frontline staff interact with linguistically diverse persons or how they overcome a language barrier. And so in 2022, we established the first of its kind serving non-English speaking customers training module. To the left here, you can see me delivering that training, or I should say a portion of that training to the impact team, which was a wonderful experience. But in the first cohort that we identified to receive this training, we've achieved 80% completion, and that's about 1,500 people. So our initial cohort that we identified was about 2,000 RTD frontline staff. Another effort, translating vital materials. So initially, our How to Ride guide was only available in English and Spanish. I have since worked with marketing and communications to produce the How to Ride guide in 26 different languages. So that includes our 21 safe harbor languages, in addition to 5 that we've identified are important to the newcomer communities. The How to Ride video is another one where it was only available in English and Spanish, and we worked with communications to produce that in Vietnamese and Chinese, as well as correcting the Spanish version, just a few little errors here and there. And then I would highlight too, we're really focusing on supporting other teams, other business units that historically have not received a lot of language access support, namely market development with discount programs, right? And Access-a-Ride. So translating Access-a-Ride documents and assets, in addition to our own team's Title VI, in-house documents that we have. And finally, some remaining activities I'd like to highlight. So we established the first of its kind language access program webpage, rtd-denver.com/language access. Again, it's just improving the visibility of this work at our agency and really highlighting that this is important to us. On that page, folks can request an interpreter, they can request translated documents, and read our language access plan if they so wish. We also produced, and I should say this is very important to me, is producing resources and tools that our staff can use to help overcome language barriers. So here to the right, and it's a little small, I apologize, but this is called an I Speak card. And you may have seen this at a healthcare facility, for example. But the idea is essentially that an RTD frontline staff member, who's interacting in person with a customer, has the I Speak card, and they can ask the customer, if a language barrier is present, to identify the language that they speak so that the RTD staff can better assist them in the language of their heart. And then perhaps most visibly, NextRide, the RTD website, these have been published with a built-in translation widget that uses DeepL. So specifically, they're available in Spanish, simplified Chinese, Vietnamese, and Russian, and we will work to have those available in more safe harbor languages to follow. Finally, the sign at the bottom. So this is an example of us essentially going above and beyond what's required of us by the FTA. This is a language assistance dedicated bus interior card that we have put across our fixed route bus fleet. And it essentially says language assistance is available at no cost and how to access that telephonic interpretation. The icon that you see here to the left was created in collaboration with community partners. We actually had community members vote on the icon that they felt was most representative of language access. And so that's just a fun little tidbit and example of how we're really trying to incorporate community into this work. Next slide, please. So after all of that being said, I will say I am very excited about the language access work that's happening here at RTD. I do feel that we have made pretty great strides in strategizing this language access work. So there are a few things that I have top of mind as we move from our current language access plan into our next language access plan starting in 2025 to 2028. Next slide, please. So the first thing that I want to be very clear on is that the 38 tasks within the language access plan do not represent a ceiling that we cannot surpass as an agency. Instead, this is very much foundational work, right? This is the floor on which the agency can continue to improve upon our language access efforts. Now, part of that is really centering the voices and the needs of the individuals who need language access the most. And this specifically is our newcomer community members, right? So immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. Working with these organizations and these community members will really allow us to understand if our language access efforts are being effective and if they're even connecting to the people that they're intended to. The second is seeing how RTD can shift from this mindset of simple language access, of achieving, perhaps compliance with the FTA, and moving up beyond that, and maybe consider how can we start achieving, true language justice instead of merely language access. So, for example, how does RTD proactively pursue activities that include linguistically diverse individuals from the get-go, right? From the beginning of our activities and public engagement, instead of just emphasizing the removal of barriers, instead of emphasizing, hey, interpretations available if you need it, what can we do beyond that while acknowledging an individual's right to communicate in the language that they're most articulate in? And finally, one thing I would say too, we want to make sure, in the effort of continuous process improvement, that the plan tasks are SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, okay? Just so we can make sure that there is great clarity on what we are achieving, and that what we're doing is measurable in 2025 and beyond. Next slide. With that, I would conclude this presentation. I'm very grateful and excited to be here. And I would just, really like to highlight that this work, language access work, is very much part and parcel of us producing that welcoming transit environment that we talk about. Our mission is to make lives better through connections, and that's true of all people, regardless of their background, their identity, and the language they speak. And so we want to ensure that our transit system is a welcoming and dignified and inclusive environment for all. And this is just part of achieving that goal. So I want to thank you. And now I would love to open the floor to any questions, comments, or feedback.
All right, thank you, Danny. A tremendous presentation. I just wish you had a little more energy for us. Tongue in cheek there. Real easy to listen to. Wonderful presentation. Great progress. Director Harwick, floor is yours.
Hi, Danny. I just want to say thank you so much for that presentation. That was amazing. I work for the city of Denver and during the day in my day job, and we see how much work's going on over there, and it's complemented just so much by the work that you all are doing. And I just want to say thank you. And obviously English is my first language, but I can't imagine, coming to a new city, a new country, and, sort of starting from, a place of not knowing, and just for you all to be able to be there in so many different places is really outstanding. So thank you for going above and beyond. Just really proud of the work that you all are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Harwick. That means a lot to me.
Well said, Director Harwick. Sorry I was muted because I'm trying to be quiet and let the real good presenters talk. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you. And I just want to echo that really, Danny, your presentation and all your efforts and your team's efforts are exceptional. And thank you for that. Perhaps I'm drilling down a little bit with my question, but the MyRide app, how will that be adapted in light of the work that you're doing?
If I may, Chair Whitmore.
You may.
Sure. I'm actually going to pass the baton off to Mr. Summers, Stuart Summers, because he was just talking about this earlier today in an all-staff meeting, essentially the idea of adjusting our apps, including the MyRide app, to be an all-in-one app. And of course, we would want to make sure that language access is part of that. So, Stuart?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Whitmore, and thank you for the question, Director Rosenthal. So right now we're doing a scope of work to investigate what it would take to create one app to roll all apps. We have our Transit Watch app, we have our NextRide app, and we have our MyRide app. And it is a barrier for individuals to access our services. I talked about this, I believe, at last month's Operation Safety and Security committee meeting about just our increased need to ensure that we're providing communications in real time in the way that customers need it. Language access will be part of that exploratory exercise. And our plan is to put together a scope of work of what we want an app to do, and then put those plans into place and see what it would take to actually make them happen as soon as possible so that we can better support our customers instead of having them use multiple applications.
Yes, and I do recall you mentioning that last month. I think that is really a step in the right direction to simplify if we are able to do so. Other questions from the group regarding this presentation? If not, we'll move on. Danny, Carl, thank you very much. Great work. Great work. All right, let's shift to people power now. Human resources update, Q2 2024. Turn the floor over to Charlene Pelleggi, Chief People Officer, to present this item. Charlene? Oh, we are muted, Charlene.
Of course we are. So Charlene Pelleggi, Chief People Officer, thank you for that, Chair Whitmore. I'm assuming I am able to be heard at this point.
Good on my front.
Great. So I've asked John McKay to run the slides because, as we know, sometimes I have technical difficulties, so trying to eliminate those for the committee. I'm here today to talk about Q2 human resources update. In our human resources update, next slide, please, John. We talk about our HR dashboard, which really is comprised of recruitment and retention efforts that remains. Those two areas remain our primary focus. So kicking off with recruitment, I'll move into the overall recruitment and separation dashboard to orient you because we report this quarterly, it's constructed quarterly, and we're looking at the results for Q2. What you can see here is that at the end of Q2, June 30, 2024, we had 2,943 active full or part-time employees. So this is employees, and this data excludes any contractors, pardon me. That's against, if we put that against our budgeted 2024 budgeted full-time and part-time employees of 3,457, that gives us a 15% vacancy rate. That represents a 2% decrease from the prior quarter. And when we look at this, we break it down a bit further. I think we can see here there's a 41% increase in the number of hires in Q2 relative to Q1 with 227. Conversely, though, we do see I think it's roughly a 17% increase in separations over that same comparator period of quarter to quarter. However, I just want to ground, green is good on this slide. You'll note that the Q2 separation is yellow. So it's pointing up because we've had an increase in separations. It's yellow and not red because we were able to net a 20% net over the same quarter of 2023. That's really driven by the increase in hire activity. Next slide, please. So as we drill down further, again, we focus on bus operations and rail and transit police are real front line supporting positions. So when we're looking at bus operations, I'd like to highlight, I've made a few changes to this reporting, and I just want to draw the committee's attention to that. These changes were made at the request of committee members who were looking for just a little bit more detail to help get a more fulsome understanding of the data. So the first thing I'll draw your attention to is with our full-time operators, this number shows a 9-point increase from Q1 to Q2. So that's the new graph in the bottom right section of each area. And so we've had a 9% increase, which would take us up to a 96% of staffed full-time operator positions. That does include 87 trainees. So what's key here is that that doesn't equate to, we have 96% fully staffed, ready to go, and able to be out in the district providing service. So I do want to make that correlation. If we were to back out, just anticipating a question, if we were to back out those 87 trainees, that would put us at 86%. and that's 86% of operators who are available to serve the district. The reason why we have them included, though, is because it's against budgeted positions, and these 87 trainees are occupying a full-time bus operator position. They're just happen to be in their trainee stage. Moving on then to maintenance general repair. Here we've actually had a 4-point decrease over the previous quarter. So at this point, we're at 82% staffed. To orient you, though, because of the ratio is relative to the number of budgeted positions, this represents a decrease of 2 positions. With service and cleaning, a marginal increase at 91% staffed. We are currently have 8 vacancies for service and cleaning positions within bus operations. Our part-time bus operator remains flat, so you'll see no metric that indicates any trainees or any quarter-over-quarter metric. When we look at the maintenance body shop, again, we've had similar to the maintenance general repair. We had a 3-point decrease that represents 1 position. So we had one of those 109 separations were within our maintenance and body shop positions. Overall, though, bus operations against budgeted positions had a 1-point increase to 88%. Moving on then to light rail, using the same format in each slide. You'll see that the light rail, and I believe Director Rosenthal, you had alluded to it earlier in one of your questions. We certainly have seen an increase in light rail recruitment. We currently have 20 trainees in various stages of their operator training. That brings the light rail training to 94%. That's a 7-point increase over the previous quarter. Similarly, if I was to back out those 20 trainees, that would bring the overall staffing rate down to 84%. When we have light rail maintenance, we've had a slight increase of 1% there. That in this instance represents the addition of 4 additional positions. Service and cleaning had a slight drop there, down to 87%. No change in our full-time train operators, and our maintenance of way, though, had significant movement here. At each reporting, for those who remember last year, I every quarter had no change in this category. It was very difficult to recruit to. The talent acquisition team has made some targeted adjustments in recruiting, partnering with representatives of the rail operations team, and we've also added additional a talent acquisition partner focusing on these positions. So we've seen an 11-point increase over the previous quarter. Just to break that out, some really critical additions. We were able to hire 8 signal traction power maintainers. This has been historically, in my short time at the agency, a very challenging position to fill. And then also additional track maintainers. So much needed maintenance of way staff added here, and the efforts continue. Overall, the light rail staffing, overall staff rate has increased 4 points and currently 6 as of June 30th. I shouldn't say currently because it changes daily, sits at 86%. So moving then on to commuter rail. Really, in commuter rail, we haven't seen a significant change from the previous quarter in any of the categories other than rail laborer. Again, the rail laborer position for commuter rail has been challenging to fill, but we have had some success there, and that current staff rate sits at 87%. The overall staffing rate, though, at commuter rail remained unchanged and sits at 85%. Next, I want to talk about transit police. So the first thing I would draw your attention to is that out of the 5 job classifications, we see that they are 100% staffed against budget. In particular with transit police, because we are growing the transit police department, I really want to highlight that these are against budget. This is by no means should we step away from here with the perception that we are completely staffed for the full build out. We are completely staffed for commanders, sergeants, lieutenants, and corporals against 2024 budget. So what we had targeted for. I made a slight edit here and really highlighted sworn officers. So you'll see, conversely, this is contrary to the previous slides. We have this number of 83% excludes the trainees. It does not include it. Why is that? Why are we doing this differently? Because there is a real distinction with our sworn officers as opposed to those who are currently going through their training. They can't be referenced as officers until they are post-certified, until they have been sworn as officers. And so we wanted to make that notation here. That said, we have seen a increase of 13 percentage points since the previous quarter. I can also say that we anticipate with these 11 trainees, assuming they all make it through their training, I believe we will only have 4 sworn officer positions vacant against the 2024 budget. So that leaves overall the Transit Police Department against budget for 2024 at 96% staff. So that's a 12-point increase. So moving on then from recruitment, let's dive a little deeper into our retention numbers. So year over year turnover comparison. So we're looking at Q2 of 2023 against the same quarter in 2024. As previously highlighted, we have had a 17% increase in total separations. However, you'll see that the split between involuntary and voluntary is relatively stable, with the Q2 2024 involuntary rate at 20% and voluntary at 80%. When we look down to break down, we talk about our reasons. So next slide, please. Voluntary turnover by reason. A little bit of changes this quarter, pardon me. What actually I'd like to flag here, most of these reasons have actually decreased. What has adjusted this rating is dissatisfied with job. This change is I'll say significant because it's really driving. It's an 8-point increase from the previous quarter. So we certainly have seen an uptick, and although not represented here in my research that I do at every quarter to look at these numbers, of those that are dissatisfied with the job, 40% are bus operators, which would then reflect some of the differences that we're seeing. And I think AGM Worthen was referring to it, that that number of 96%, it's constantly changing. We've got trainees and we have individuals who are on leave, and we also have some individuals who don't make it through training and or who don't stay. Of those 40% who are dissatisfied with the job, they were hired within the last 48 months. Next slide, please. Lastly, I want to look at the involuntary turnover by reason. Unfortunately, as happens from time to time in respective quarters, we regrettably had 2 of our employees pass away in this quarter, and so that represents an increase of involuntary turnover. The other numbers are relatively stable, except for we have violation of attendance policy has decreased significantly, but we're seeing an increase in job performance. So the HR team is working with the operations team to try to see what's driving that. Usually when you see such a flip on the axis, the first place we go to is to make sure that we're accurately capturing, because these are reasons that the supervisors and managers are able to identify when an employee indicates that they are that we're looking to terminate an employee. So I'll take a deeper dive into this, but as of right now, 64% of the involuntary turnover is directly related to job performance. That represents the HR report and overview for the recruitment and retention metrics for Q2. And I'll pause, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi. Very good presentation. I like the reformatting and real easy to understand. So especially helpful to see some upward trends and doing better each and every quarter. Questions, comments from the committee? I do not see any. Believe it or not, Charlene.
Oh,
of course.
Sorry.
Director Rosenthal's not gonna.
I'm sorry.
No, don't
I
apologize.
I try to ask questions that are direct and relevant, and so hopefully this will be as well. Charlene, and maybe just to fine tune what you said, we saw a decrease in attendance, people leaving because of attendance involuntarily, and then an increase in performance issues. Is it possible that some folks were, whereas they might have called out before, but now they're coming to work and they're, they're not in the right mindset or what have you, and that might affect their performance?
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. That's a difficult question for me to answer because I don't have that information to understand what's driving that increase in the job performance. What I will say is there's a couple things that have changed, over each quarter. So we do have an increase in, sorry, I lost my train of thought. We have concluded manager and supervisor training, which is not intended to increase involuntary separation, but it is intended to ensure that we are communicating, that we're engaging in dialogue, that we're addressing any challenges that we may have from a service and or a performance perspective in a timely fashion. I don't know if that's driving it. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's because people previously would have been calling out and then actually are coming in and not being in the right frame of mind. What I do know is it is such a significant change and a flip that it warrants further investigation. And we are looking at that in HR to explore it. So I wish I had a more concrete answer, but at this point, 24 days in from the results, I would hate to speculate on what that is. What I do know is the 20% is important. What we also track is we don't want to see like a huge spike in involuntary as opposed to voluntary either. So, that is sitting at pretty consistently around 20%, but we will look into that.
Thank you. And just an observation as well. And one of the number one issue actually that I hear about in community, especially as I go door to door, et cetera, is the safety issue. And I have to say that as I go to particularly our light rail stations and Union Station, that I'm seeing a dramatic increase in the presence and involvement of our Allied Universal and our transit police. And I think that it's contributing to an overall sense of safety. And so, your efforts on recruitment and retention, I think are paying off. We just need to continue to work on that. And thank you to you and your team and to general manager and everyone for really focusing on that. And just one more point about Union Station. And I mean, just there's discouraging folks from even sitting on the floor. It's clean, it's beautiful. I see the bathrooms are open. Just so folks know, it's a dramatic difference and improvement over about a year and a half ago when the words that we were constantly hearing was crisis and that sort of thing. So I really want to commend you and everyone for that kind of work on our safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Whitmore. If I could, just want to say I'll definitely pass on from a recruitment perspective the acknowledgement, because that is that team that's really driving all of that work. But I would also be remiss if I didn't highlight that the employee survey also supports what you just said, Director Rosenthal, in that I recall presenting to this committee sometime last year and discussing the employee results in particular around safety. And I know GM Johnson talked about that, and the numbers have increased exceptionally, but they're not where we want them to be. Because I think I recall saying at that time, every employee of RTD and every customer deserves a right to be operating in a safe and healthy environment. And so the efforts are there for sure, and we're not going to take our foot off the pedal, so to speak. We're going to continue to do that work. So good kudos as well to the Transit Police Department in those efforts.
Thank you, and I completely agree. Appreciate it.
Thank you both, and I do appreciate Ms. Pelleggi, you mentioning the employee survey aspect. That's really the true measurement. That and obviously what we hear from our constituents in our respective districts. So I do not see any more hands raised. So before I move to other matters and open that floor up for that, I just wanted to recognize again the hard work of Directors Ruscia and Harwick, who provided a great presentation last month on Vision Zero. It was clear to me at the end of the meeting that there's strong interest among committee members to explore further what actions this board can take and to consider to advance the cause of safety. So given this interest, I endeavored to follow up on the matter with our board chair and GM and CEO. We met earlier this month to discuss potential concepts to include in a future action by the board of directors. And in the course of that conversation, I was reminded that RTD is already helping to lead on this issue by being an ally in action since April of 2023 with the U.S. Department of Transportation in their National Roadway Safety Strategy. And from what I understand, this strategy prioritizes a safe system approach, much the same as Vision Zero efforts do. I also walked away from that meeting hopeful that we could work with staff and Directors Ruscia and Harwick to identify the tenets of this resolution through this committee or elsewhere, and certainly we'll move forward in considering so this fall. The resolution, the way I see it, would recommit RTD to a safe systems approach, provide a call for directors to engage with their fellow elected leaders at the local, county, and state levels to further advance the causes of Vision Zero. And I believe the hard work of our Directors Ruscia and Harwick, they have done so far has raised our collective awareness, and I appreciate that immensely on this specific topic. And I look forward to continuing to learn more from them and others on the ways that directors can lead in making RTD and the environments that we operate safer for all. And to that end, the board office has informed me that all signs are pointing for us to be discussing this item as a group at the regular July full board meeting, which is already coming quickly next week, I believe on the 30th. Okay, with that, are there any other directors, committee members with other matters to discuss this evening? All right. Well, I'm going to take one chair's prerogative here, something that we don't do as a group of leaders often enough before we wrap up. And I just want to take a moment to give a big shout out and send thanks along to the community servants that serve as RTD employees. This has been a tremendously busy time, tremendously busy week. I'm sure staff thinks it's Friday at 5 p.m. and we're just to Wednesday. But I just want to give a shout out to GM CEO Deborah Johnson, General Counsel Snyder, John McKay, who's done so much work behind the scenes, AGM Fred Worthen, CPO Pelegi, Jesse Carter in Service Development, Carl Green and Division of Civil Rights, and as well as the board office for everyone's hard work pulling these materials together over the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months. We appreciate the presentations from AGM Stuart Summers. Also, additional thanks to people that we haven't heard from that much, but I have a hunch we will in the future. And Martin Romero and Danny McLean, who presented wonderfully tonight. And thank you also to Visible Voices for what they do for us. That's not an easy job, and I do appreciate them immensely providing a service to where we communicate in the utmost manner. All right. With no meeting in August, the next Operations Safety and Security Committee meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, September 11th. At that meeting, our work plan has us slated to consider actions to procure a wheel truing machine, as well as cameras for our light rail vehicles. Additionally, we'll have some discussions related to the January 2025 service changes, our Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, more commonly referred to as PTASP. And on the horizon for a meeting soon will be a check-in related to the System Optimization Plan. And the committee may or may not be discussing Vision Zero, depending on what the full board decides to do with that action with discussion next week. So with that, no more discussion on the agenda. I will declare this meeting adjourned at 7:17 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you all. Great meeting. Good job, staff. Have a pleasant evening. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Good.
Thank you,
Good night,
Mr. Chair.
everybody.